There is a skeleton in a museum in Khartoum. It belongs to a person who lived approximately 13,400 years ago in the Nile Valley, in what is now northern Sudan. There is a stone point embedded in the left side of their rib cage, not resting near the bone, not dropped nearby, but driven into living tissue with enough force to lodge permanently in the rib itself. That person survived. The bone grew around the stone, which means that after that first attack, someone found them, alive, recovered, going about their life, and attacked them again. There is a second wound, unhealed. That one killed them. No country, no border, no army, no flag, no declaration of anything. Just one human being, or a group of them, who decided that this specific other person needed to die. Twice. That skeleton is 13,400 years old, and it raises a question that has never been fully answered. Did humans invent war? Or has it always been part of what we are? The site is called Jebel Sahaba. 61 individuals buried in a cemetery on the Nile, men, women, and children. Of those, 41 bore signs of violent injury. Most wounds came from projectile weapons, spears, arrows, stone points driven into bodies at velocity. A quarter of the injured showed both healed and unhealed trauma. They survived one attack. They were attacked again, some multiple times. This is not a single battle. It is a pattern, chronic, recurring violence against a community over an extended period. Researchers who reanalyzed the site in 2021 called it the earliest known evidence of what they described as an early form of sporadic warfare. Not a fight, a campaign. Which raises the obvious question, how old does this actually go? Approximately 10,000 years ago, at a site called Nataruk near Lake Turkana in Kenya, 27 people were killed in what appears to have been a single massacre event. Men, women, children, one of them a heavily pregnant woman whose wrists appear to have been bound. Obsidian points were found embedded in skulls. Blunt force trauma consistent with clubs was found on multiple skeletons. These were nomadic hunter-gatherers. No settlement, no granary, no obvious resource to defend. The pattern at both sites, organized, deliberate, group-on-group lethal violence, predates everything we normally associate with war. No city-states, no armies, no generals. Which means the question isn't just when war began. It's what, exactly, we're looking at when we look at these skeletons. Here's the thing about chimpanzees that changes the framing entirely. Jane Goodall spent years observing a chimpanzee community at Gombe, Tanzania, beginning in the 1960s. What she eventually documented was a 4-year conflict between two groups, the Kasakila and Kahama communities, originally part of the same band, in which the larger group systematically killed every adult male in the smaller one. Not in battles, in raids. Groups of 4 to 9 males would locate a lone member of the rival community and kill them, methodically, over 4 years, until no adult males remained. This pattern has since been documented in dozens of chimpanzee communities across Africa. It is not rare. It is not caused by human encroachment, as early critics suggested. It appears to be part of how these animals manage intergroup competition. We share a common ancestor with chimpanzees. That ancestor lived approximately 6 million years ago. So where does that leave the question of human nature? Here's where the debate gets uncomfortable, and where both sides of it are partially right. One camp argues for what's called the deep roots hypothesis. Lawrence Keeley, Steven Pinker, and others have compiled evidence suggesting that organized group violence is ancient, possibly predating our species, and that the image of peaceful prehistoric life is a romantic myth projected backwards. Keeley's analysis of violence rates in prehistoric skeletal remains found that pre-state societies were often more violent per capita than modern ones. When you account for population size, more people died proportionally from intergroup violence in prehistoric times than in the 20th century, including its wars. The opposing camp argues that true warfare is a cultural invention. Researchers like R. Brian Ferguson and Douglas Fry distinguish between the raiding and feuding visible in sites like Jebel Sahaba, small-scale, opportunistic, without political direction, and the organized, strategically directed, large-scale violence that deserves the word war. In their view, the capacity for group violence is old, the institution of war is not. The honest answer is that this distinction is real and important. What chimpanzees do at Gombe is organized and lethal, but it is not war in the full sense. What happened at Jebel Sahaba was repeated and organized, but it is not the same thing as Sargon of Akkad, marching a professional standing army across Mesopotamia in 2300 BCE. The capacity and the institution are different things, and the institution required something specific to emerge. It required something worth taking. For almost all of human prehistory, the most valuable things a group possessed could not be stolen. The knowledge of where to find water in a dry season, the social bonds within the group, the skill of an individual hunter. You can kill a person, but you cannot raid their expertise. You can drive off a group, but you cannot carry away their understanding of the landscape. And then agriculture happened. A granary can be stolen, a field can be seized, cattle can be taken. When humans began accumulating storable, stealable surplus, starting roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, the calculus of intergroup violence changed permanently. Raiding went from high risk for uncertain gain to high risk for potentially enormous gain. The communities that began building walls, Jericho's stone fortifications date to approximately 8,000 BCE, were not being paranoid. They were responding rationally to a new threat environment that agriculture itself had created. But immovable wealth alone wasn't enough to produce war as an institution. For that, you needed something else, someone capable of commanding violence at scale. Here's what made armies possible, and why they couldn't exist before. Hunter-gatherer societies are broadly egalitarian. Status exists, influence exists, but the kind of rigid hierarchy where one person can order others to march toward people who want to kill them and have those orders reliably followed is structurally incompatible with small mobile bands. People can simply leave. Leadership is opt-in. The whole social arrangement is fluid in a way that mass-organized violence cannot be. Agricultural settlements changed this in one specific way. They removed the exit option. When your survival depends on a specific field, a specific granary, a specific community infrastructure, you cannot leave if you disagree with the leadership. You are tied to the place. And when people are tied to a place, the people who control the place can extract obedience in ways that were not available before. That is the structural precondition for an army. And once armies existed, the third ingredient for full-scale war appeared, and this one lived entirely inside the brain. Your brain has a powerful automatic empathy system. When you see another person in pain, specific neural circuits activate, the same circuits involved in your own experience of pain. This system is what makes cooperation possible, what makes you stop to help a stranger, what makes the idea of harming someone you can clearly see as human feel viscerally wrong. This is, from the perspective of organized violence, a serious operational problem. Every military culture in human history has solved it the same way, by creating a cognitive category that removes the target from the class of beings to whom empathy applies. They are not fully human. They are dangerous. They are different in a way that makes the empathy circuit's interference manageable. The process is called dehumanization, and it is not the product of individual pathology. It is a deliberately maintained social technology. The propaganda, the slurs, the stories about the enemy, the uniforms that make us and them visually obvious, engineered to keep the empathy system suppressed long enough for organized killing to proceed. The in-group, out-group distinction itself is ancient. Brain imaging research shows it activating in milliseconds automatically when subjects view faces from perceived outgroups. A slightly elevated stress response, a slight reduction in the activation of empathy circuits. This is not something people consciously choose. It is an automatic categorization that runs faster than thought. What human cultures added was the amplification of that distinction, turning a millisecond flicker of caution into a sustained, culturally reinforced belief that the people on the other side of the boundary are not quite real in the way you are real. That technology is what allowed ordinary people to participate in extraordinary violence across every culture that has ever gone to war. And here is where it connects back to that skeleton in Khartoum. The person at Jebel Sahaba who was attacked twice, who survived the first time and was killed the second, was attacked by people who looked essentially identical to them. Same species, same era, same general way of life. The cognitive machinery that sorted them into enemy was not based on meaningful difference. It was based on group membership, enforced by the same ancient circuitry that your brain runs every time it automatically categorizes a stranger. The capacity was always there. What the Neolithic added was the combination of circumstances, wealth, hierarchy, and the systematic amplification of the outgroup distinction that turned an ancient primate behavior into an institution. War is not human nature in the sense of being inevitable or unalterable, but neither is it a cultural accident with no biological roots. It is an institution built on top of a very old foundation, using very old tools, for very new purposes. That is what the skeleton in Khartoum is actually telling you. Not that violence is who we are, but that the architecture was always there, waiting for the right conditions to scale it. Step back and the question, did humans invent war, gets its honest answer. Kind of. Partially. Incompletely. The capacity for organized group violence is old enough to predate our species, shared with chimpanzees, visible in skeletal remains older than civilization. That part was not invented. It was inherited from a deep evolutionary history that neither humans nor chimpanzees created. But the institution, the professional army, the siege, the politically directed campaign of conquest, the systematic enslavement of the defeated, required specific historical inventions layered on top of that ancient foundation. Something worth taking at scale, a hierarchy capable of commanding violence, and a psychological technology for making mass killing sustainable. None of those conditions were inevitable. They required specific historical circumstances to emerge, which means war, in the full institutional sense, is not written into human biology the way breathing is. It is a construction, one built on an ancient base, but a construction. That distinction does not make history less dark. It makes it legible. And what can be understood can, sometimes, be changed. Here's the one thing. The next time you feel that automatic sharpening of hostility toward a group, any group, defined by whatever boundary is currently salient, notice the mechanism. Not the content. The mechanism. Your brain drew a line. Someone ended up on the other side of it, and something very old activated. The same ancient circuitry that, under the right historical conditions, became the technology that made Jebel Sahaba possible. You cannot turn that circuit off. It is standard equipment. But you can learn to recognize the moment it fires, that automatic shift from person to them, and ask what is being done to that circuit by the stories, institutions, and media around you right now. The empathy circuit and the outgroup circuit run in the same brain. What determines which one dominates in any given moment is not fixed by nature. It is shaped by what you've been told, how often, and by whom. That is still in your hands. And if the idea that your brain contains the same circuitry that made organized violence possible for 13,000 years stays with you, wait until you hear what that same brain does when the threat is internal rather than external, when someone inside your own group breaks the rules. What ancient humans did when someone in their tribe lied, and the enforcement system they built to deal with it, that one's already up.